Imagine a hidden thread weaving silently through the very fabric of history, a secret whispered through the centuries, written in stone, etched into symbols, yet invisible to most. What if the events shaping our world were guided not by obvious forces, but by quiet masters of secrecy hidden in plain sight? Tonight, uncover the extraordinary story of the Freemasons and discover how their silent codes and ancient rituals may have shaped our civilization far more than you ever imagined. The great architects of secrecy, Freemasonry, is not just a secret society, it's a hidden blueprint embedded in history itself. Picture codes and mysteries quietly shaping civilizations, concealed within symbols that stare us right in the face. Consider the simple pyramid on the dollar bill, the layout of a major city, or the precise alignments of ancient monuments scattered across the world. Each tells a story silently woven by unseen hands. But who holds these hidden threads? Legend whispers that the true architects of secrecy aren't kings or conquerors, but humble craftsmen, stone masons whose knowledge transcended mere construction. Long before they became the shadowy figures of modern conspiracy theories, these masons gathered in secretive guilds, their craft more than labor. It was sacred. Each stone laid was calculated precisely, embedding mathematics that resonated with cosmic patterns, celestial alignments, and mystical harmonies known only to initiates. Consider the grand cathedrals of medieval Europe, magnificent structures towering over villages, their intricate geometry far more than mere aesthetics. Historians have found encoded within these designs ratios like the golden mean and Fibonacci sequences, symbols that connect earthly craftsmanship with universal mysteries. Chartres Cathedral, for example, wasn't just built as a place of worship, but was carefully constructed according to astronomical events, aligning precisely with celestial patterns and incorporating hidden symbolism honoring ancient wisdom. But who taught these masons? Records hint that the wisdom they held wasn't merely technical, it was philosophical, even spiritual. Scholars speak of influences from distant lands and ancient civilizations, transmitted quietly through the centuries via manuscripts and secret oral traditions. The Egyptian mystery schools, the secretive Eleusinian rites of Greece, and even mystical teachings of ancient Babylon are believed by some to have been carefully preserved and integrated into Masonic philosophy. During the Renaissance, this hidden knowledge was quietly revived, embraced by scholars and philosophers searching for deeper truths beyond religious dogma. Secret societies flourished, and what began as guilds dedicated to physical craftsmanship evolved into philosophical brotherhoods, communities dedicated to personal and spiritual enlightenment. These secret circles eventually became known as speculative masons, philosophers who viewed architecture not only as building structures, but as creating metaphors for moral and ethical development. Over time, the invisible architecture crafted by the Freemasons seeped into the foundations of society itself. Symbols that once belonged to clandestine guilds quietly appeared in the public eye, hidden in plain sight. In America, founding fathers who were also Freemasons like George Washington and Benjamin Franklin subtly embedded Masonic symbolism into the nation's infrastructure, architecture, and even its currency. Their intent wasn't merely decorative but strategic, placing symbols of unity, balance, and enlightenment into the very core of the new republic. Not widely known, however, is the way Freemasonry has subtly influenced artistic expression, literature, and popular culture. Many famous authors, composers, and artists, from Mozart to Mark Twain, were Freemasons, embedding their works with hidden symbols, messages, and ideals inspired by Masonic teachings. Mozart's opera The Magic Flute is famously filled with Masonic allegory, presenting initiation rituals openly yet subtly, disguised as entertainment. Across centuries, Masonic influence quietly extended even into political movements and revolutions. Ideas of liberty, fraternity, and equality, propagated during the Enlightenment and the American and French revolutions, echoed core Masonic values, and many revolutionaries found inspiration within the lodge's rituals and symbols. Yet despite their pervasive influence, Freemasons rarely sought direct credit. Instead, they preferred to shape the course of history silently, subtly guiding societies through values conveyed in secretive allegories and whispered through intricate rituals. Their power lay not in visible domination, but in their ability to quietly inspire generations, embedding symbols of unity, wisdom, and balance within the hearts and minds of those willing to understand. Tonight, as sleep gently approaches, reflect on the quiet power that silently shapes our world. Consider that perhaps the true masters of history are not those who openly rule, but those who quietly guide, whispering their secrets through the timeless language of symbols. Freemasonry isn't just a story of hidden knowledge, it's the story of humanity's ongoing journey toward enlightenment, quietly encoded in the architecture of civilization itself. Origins in the stone, the operative Masons. Long before Freemasonry retreated behind closed doors, medieval stonemasons openly crafted marvels that still captivate today. These skilled artisans, the operative Masons, weren't merely builders, they were custodians of a profound and ancient wisdom, guardians of knowledge passed down from civilizations long forgotten. Imagine walking through medieval Europe at dusk. As lanterns flickered and shadows lengthened, groups of Masons would gather around campfires, sharing secrets of geometry, arithmetic, and sacred ratios. They spoke in terms known today as the Golden Ratio, a mystical number that appears throughout nature, in spiral galaxies, ocean waves, sunflower petals, and even our own DNA. These Masons believed they weren't just constructing buildings, they were replicating the harmonious designs of the universe itself. The legendary Chartres Cathedral in France remains a prime example of these mysteries. Built over several generations, its intricate design contains more than meets the casual eye. Hidden within the stonework are precise astronomical alignments, solstices, equinoxes, and celestial movements marked carefully by the architects. Each pillar, arch, and stained glass window represent symbolic numbers and ratios significant in ancient mathematics and mysticism. Yet Chartres is merely the surface of a far deeper story. Across medieval Europe, similar hidden harmonies were encoded within churches, castles, and abbeys, forming a network of spiritual sanctuaries aligned not only with stars, but with each other. A little-known example is the alignment between Chartres, Reims, and Amiens cathedrals, forming precise geographical triangles whose dimensions correlate uncannily with the proportions of ancient Egyptian pyramids. But where did these craftsmen acquire such sophisticated knowledge? Some historians point to interactions between medieval Europe and the Islamic Golden Age. Arab mathematicians had preserved and expanded ancient Greek texts, translating works of Pythagoras, Euclid, and Plato. Through peaceful exchanges and trade routes, these mathematical secrets filtered into European hands. Thus, operative Masons became repositories of a blended tradition, part classical, part Eastern, fully mysterious. Operative Masons' guilds were not merely professional organizations, they operated under a strict moral and spiritual code. Initiates underwent rites reminiscent of ancient mystery schools, emphasizing brotherhood, morality, and secrecy. They were taught that their skills were gifts, not merely practical, but profoundly spiritual. The Masons saw their work as a sacred act of creation, mirroring divine craftsmanship. Little known is that operative Masons also served as educators and scribes in their communities, teaching basic mathematics and geometry in an era when formal education was rare. Their lodges became sanctuaries of learning, bridging practical knowledge and spiritual insight, and quietly influencing societal advancement through literacy and numeracy. In England, operative Masons crafted iconic structures like Salisbury Cathedral, with its soaring spire constructed through meticulous geometric precision, a technical feat for its time. Secret marks, known as Mason's marks, appear throughout such structures. These enigmatic signatures were not mere identifiers but encoded symbols communicating deeper truths understood only by initiated members. These operative Masons also traveled widely, spreading their knowledge across Europe and beyond. Their movement facilitated not just architectural advancement, but cultural exchanges, quietly influencing art, philosophy, and spirituality. Each Mason was a living library, preserving oral traditions, secrets of construction, and ancient wisdom which would later lay the foundation for speculative Freemasonry. Eventually, as architectural needs shifted and guilds waned, operative Masonry gradually faded, its teachings preserved and transformed by the speculative Masons who emerged from their ranks. The craft's physical tools, the compass, square, and plumb line, took on metaphorical meanings, symbolizing moral virtues and spiritual truths. Tonight, as sleep draws near, picture these humble, operative Masons, quietly shaping history through their work, embedding secrets into stone, secrets that patiently await rediscovery. Let their legacy remind you that wisdom often hides in plain sight, patiently whispering across centuries to those who pause, look closely, and dare to understand. From stone to spirit, the rise of speculative Masonry. As medieval cathedrals gave way to universities and hammers fell silent in empty quarries, a new kind of Mason began to emerge. These men no longer needed to lift stones or carve lintels. Instead, they worked with the architecture of the mind and the scaffolding of the soul. This was the birth of speculative Masonry, a transition as quiet as it was profound. It's a curious twist of history. When operative guilds began to shrink due to both technological advancements and shifting economic patterns, many lodges found themselves with fewer members. To keep the traditions alive, they started admitting men of learning, philosophy, and influence. These weren't builders in the traditional sense, but thinkers, alchemists, doctors, scribes, astronomers, and poets. These new members were drawn not to the stone, but to the spirit. The moral lessons veiled in Masonic symbols, the ethical codes embedded in its rituals. By the 17th century, this shift had quietly spread across Europe. In Scotland, the earliest recorded lodge to admit non-operative Masons was the Lodge of Edinburgh in 1600. From there, the idea blossomed. These speculative Masons interpreted the builder's tools not as literal instruments but as allegories. The square taught fairness, the compass, self-restraint. The temple, once a structure of stone, became a metaphor for the perfected soul. One lesser-known figure in this philosophical transformation was Elias Ashmole, an antiquarian and student of alchemy who was initiated into a Masonic lodge in 1646. Ashmole's writings reveal how Masonic ideas were mingled with Hermeticism and Renaissance esoterica, blending practical wisdom with mystical thought. For men like Ashmole, Freemasonry wasn't a club, it was a philosophical path, one that could bridge science and spirituality. As the Age of Enlightenment dawned, these lodges became safe havens for radical thinkers. Here, men could question monarchies, discuss ideas of liberty and governance, explore science and debate ethics, all while cloaked in ritual and symbolism that gave such dialogues sacred weight. Freemasonry became, in a sense, the quiet pulse beneath the Enlightenment's heartbeat. But the secrecy wasn't just tradition, it was protection. Speaking freely about human rights, astronomy, or free will could be dangerous in the 17th and 18th centuries. Lodges offered sanctuary. Within them, Newtonian physics met Kabbalistic cosmology, and Platonic ideals were toasted with wine by candlelight. It wasn't all abstract theory, the rituals evolved too. Initiation became a journey of transformation. The blindfold represented ignorance, the cable tow our spiritual tether to conscience, the tracing board a map not of a territory, but of the initiate's inner journey. The degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason mirrored a process of rebirth, mastery, and self-realization that echoed the alchemical motto, solve et coagula, break apart and rebuild. Even the lodge room was symbolic. East represented light and wisdom, west, completion and transition. Every movement, every phrase, every candle had meaning, and much of it, though cryptic, resonated deeply with traditions from earlier mystery schools, from Eleusis to Alexandria. Few people know that speculative masonry played a role in shaping national identities. In pre-revolutionary France, lodge discussions about equality and fraternity influenced thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot. In America, George Washington's inauguration included Masonic rites. Even Simón Bolívar, liberator of South America, was initiated into Masonry. This wasn't just ritual, it was cultural architecture. Lodges became microcosms of ideal society, structured, inclusive, meritocratic, and symbolic. A place where intellect, virtue, and brotherhood were valued above lineage, wealth, or title. Tonight, as the world around you fades into quiet, imagine those first speculative Masons, scholars and mystics, rebels and visionaries, gathering in candlelit chambers, hands over hearts, eyes on the eternal. They didn't build cathedrals anymore, they built inner temples where truth could dwell, and where the spirit, freed from stone, could finally speak. The symbolic language of the lodge. Step inside a Masonic lodge and you step into a world constructed entirely of symbols, a quiet universe where every object, color, and direction has purpose. To the uninitiated, it may seem like curious decoration, a compass here, a square there, perhaps a pair of pillars flanking the room's entrance. But to a Freemason, each symbol is a living lesson, a coded message designed not to inform, but to transform. Take the compass and square, emblems so closely associated with Freemasonry that they often serve as its unofficial crest. The square teaches us to act fairly and align our actions to moral law, while the compass reminds us to set boundaries and walk the path of self-restraint. When placed together, they form the foundation of personal harmony, justice balanced by wisdom. Yet there's more. In some older depictions, the compass lies atop the square, its tips extended, symbolizing the spiritual transcending the material. At the center of this symbol lies the mysterious letter G. Most assume it stands for God. Some say it means geometry, the very science the Masons revered as the language of the universe. But deeper initiates hint at something more elusive, the gnosis, or divine knowledge, an awareness that surpasses belief and arrives only through direct inner awakening. In certain esoteric traditions, the G is said to represent the grand architect of the universe, a non-denominational creator whose tools are mathematics and mystery. Now consider the pillars. Named Boaz and Yakin in reference to Solomon's temple, these twin columns appear at the entrance of every lodge. In the Old Testament, they stood at the entrance of the temple as guardians of sacred space. In Freemasonry, they represent dualities, strength and establishment, masculine and feminine, severity and mercy. But their deeper role? They serve as symbolic gateways, ushering initiates from the mundane world into a realm of hidden understanding. Most fascinating are the lesser-known symbols that rarely make their way into popular culture. The beehive, for instance, is an ancient emblem used in some lodges to represent industriousness and cooperation. But bees also held a sacred status in ancient Egypt, associated with the soul and the afterlife. So when a Freemason gazes at a beehive, he's reminded not just of hard work, but of life's interconnectedness and the soul's journey beyond. The all-seeing eye, another misunderstood symbol, is not originally Masonic. It appears in Egyptian iconography as the Eye of Horus, and in Christian art as the Eye of Divine Providence. Within Freemasonry, however, it serves as a gentle yet constant reminder that one's thoughts and deeds are always witnessed, by others, by self, or by the universe itself. The apron, worn by Masons during lodge meetings, might seem unremarkable, but it's more than uniform. It's a badge of labor and humility. Traditionally made of lambskin, it symbolizes innocence and the dignity of honest work. Ancient stonemasons wore aprons to protect their garments from dust and debris. Speculative masons wear theirs to protect the soul from spiritual corruption. Colors hold potent meanings too. Blue, the most common lodge color, represents loyalty, truth, and the celestial canopy under which all rituals unfold. In higher degrees, red may appear, signaling passion, sacrifice, or transformative energy. Black and white checkered floors, commonly found in lodge rooms, represent the dual nature of life, light and darkness, virtue and vice, joy and sorrow. Walking upon them is a reminder that wisdom is found not by avoiding polarity, but by navigating it with grace. Even numbers speak. The number 3, appearing in the 3 degrees, 3 knocks, and the 3 lights, symbolizes balance, unity, and the synthesis of opposites. But the number 7, often referenced subtly in lectures, is said to denote spiritual perfection and is echoed in the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, subjects every Freemason was once encouraged to study. Some lodges also incorporate symbols from Rosicrucianism, alchemy, and Hermetic teachings. The blazing star, often confused with the pentagram, is sometimes placed at the lodge's center to represent divine guidance, akin to the Star of Bethlehem. Its rays speak to the inner spark, the light of consciousness within every soul. In older rituals, this star was linked to Sirius, the dog star, which many ancient cultures considered the gateway to hidden realms. Language itself becomes symbolic. Phrases like "on the level" or "being square" are rooted in Masonic vernacular and reflect values of equality and honesty. Even the way members address each other as brother carries the weight of shared initiation and moral obligation. And let's not forget silence. Yes, silence itself is a symbol. In Freemasonry, the initiate is taught early on that not all knowledge is to be spoken. Some truths must be earned through patience and reflection. Just as music requires silence between notes, wisdom often arises not in speech, but in stillness. Tonight, as the world dims and you begin to fade into rest, think about the strange beauty of this symbolic world, a place where tools become teachings, garments become guides, and rooms become reflections of the cosmos. To the outsider, it may all seem like theater, but to the initiate, it is a language older than words, a secret grammar of the soul. And in this quiet universe of symbols, the journey doesn't end with understanding. It begins. The lodge and the church, spiritual enemies. It's hard to imagine two institutions so different, yet so entwined in conflict, as the Catholic Church and Freemasonry. Their feud isn't just about rituals or symbols, it's about worldviews, power structures, and the authority to shape the soul. Long before the Church issued its first public condemnation, there were already whispers of concern. The Masons, after all, conducted their meetings behind closed doors. They used strange signs, passwords, oaths, and rituals. They welcomed men of every faith, so long as they believed in a supreme being. That alone disturbed a church that insisted on singular truth under one holy doctrine. The first formal strike came in 1738. Pope Clement XII issued the papal bull In Eminenti Apostolatus Specula, declaring that all Catholic men who joined the Freemasons were excommunicated. It wasn't a light statement, it was an ideological cannonball. But what truly alarmed the Vatican? It wasn't just secrecy, it was sovereignty. The lodge claimed moral authority independent of the Church. Freemasonry promoted free thought, individual conscience, and reason over dogma. These weren't fringe ideas in Enlightenment Europe, they were radical acts of rebellion, and many Freemasons were not just passive thinkers, they were writers, lawmakers, scientists, and revolutionaries. The Church feared the spread of these ideas as much as it feared swords. Less commonly known is the role Freemasonry played in undermining the Church's political control across Europe. In France, many of the thinkers who laid the philosophical groundwork for the French Revolution were Freemasons: Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, even the architects of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. The revolution didn't just topple a monarchy, it stripped the Catholic Church of land, privilege, and spiritual monopoly. In Latin America, figures like Simón Bolívar, himself a Mason, used Masonic ideals to ignite liberation movements that broke the grip of both colonial empires and church influence. Even in Italy, the unification process that reduced the Pope's temporal power was driven in part by Masonic thinkers like Giuseppe Garibaldi. That's the part often left out of Sunday sermons. The Vatican struck back repeatedly. Between 1738 and 1983, at least 8 papal decrees were issued against Freemasonry. In the 19th century, the Jesuits labeled it part of a global conspiracy to destroy Christianity. Some clerics even believed Masons were Luciferians, citing misunderstood symbols and texts. A rumor spread through Europe that Masons worshipped Baphomet, a horned figure popularized much later in occult imagery, but with no authentic connection to standard Masonic teaching. But this wasn't a one-sided war. Freemasonry was no stranger to subtextual retaliation. Lodge rituals subtly inverted ecclesiastical hierarchy. Where the Church placed salvation in divine grace, the Lodge emphasized personal responsibility. While the Church built cathedrals to reach heaven, the Masons believed that heaven could be found through inner construction, symbolic temples built in the heart. There's also the matter of ritual. Masonic rites borrow language and motifs from biblical texts, but reinterpret them in philosophical, not theological terms. The story of Hiram Abiff, the martyred builder of Solomon's temple, serves not as a Christ figure, but as a symbol of human sacrifice for truth, craftsmanship, and honor. This reframing disturbed traditional theologians who saw it as a distortion of Scripture. It didn't help that Masonic lodges often mirrored church structures, columns where altars should be, readings instead of sermons, initiations in place of baptisms. The imitation was not mockery, it was a reimagining, and reimaginings to those in power are threats. Even today, tensions linger. Though the 1983 Code of Canon Law omitted the word Freemasonry, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith reaffirmed that membership remains incompatible with Catholic doctrine. Why? Because the Lodge still represents an alternate model of truth. It honors multiple paths to the divine. It holds no pope, no infallibility, no dogma. And yet, in a curious twist, many Freemasons have been practicing Catholics. Historically, even some clergy joined quietly, seeking brotherhood, moral reflection, and philosophical freedom. It created a dual allegiance, one to Rome and one to reason. Some managed both. Others were caught in the crossfire. Tonight, as you close your eyes, consider this quiet struggle, not of armies, but of ideas. The Church, with its towering doctrine and solemn chants, the Lodge, with its candles and compasses and whispered truths. One sought salvation through obedience, the other sought enlightenment through initiation. And between them, a centuries-long dance of suspicion, resistance, and the enduring human hunger for the sacred. The Masonic initiation, birth into secrecy. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're blindfolded in a quiet room. You can feel the silence pressing in. There's a faint scent of beeswax candles and aged wood. Someone takes your arm. You don't know where you're going, only that you must trust. This isn't a theatrical act, it's a ritual, a rite of passage, older than most modern institutions. You're not just walking into a room. You're crossing a threshold into a hidden world. In Freemasonry, initiation isn't simply admission into a fraternity. It's a symbolic rebirth, a process steeped in allegory, carefully designed to mirror the inner journey of the human soul. It begins with darkness, not metaphorical, but literal. The candidate is blindfolded, symbolizing ignorance, the unawakened self, the one still bound to the ordinary world. This act, though quiet, is profound. In psychological terms, it forces the initiate to relinquish control, to rely on faith and the guidance of others, evoking a confrontation with the unknown parts of one's mind, the shadow, as Jung might say. The journey through initiation bears unmistakable traces of ancient mystery schools. The Egyptian rites of Isis and Osiris involve symbolic death and resurrection. The Eleusinian mysteries required secrecy and enacted metaphors of life emerging from darkness. Masonic initiation shares this DNA. The language may differ, but the goal is the same: transformation. Each step in the ritual, each word uttered, each object encountered, the square, the compass, the trowel, has layered meaning. These aren't tools of stonecutters anymore. They are tools for building the self. The initiate learns to measure life with fairness, to shape it with discipline, to bind it with moral cement. The lodge becomes a symbolic construction site for the soul. But let's go deeper into elements not often discussed. One of the lesser-known parts of the initiation is the presentation of the cable toe, a cord placed around the initiate's body, usually the neck or arm. This isn't just symbolic bondage, it represents the obligations we carry in life, the unseen tethers that bind us to responsibility, to society, to truth. The way it's worn, the tension in its pull, reflects the candidate's stage of development. There's also the moment of being divested of all metals. Before entering the lodge, the candidate must remove all coins, jewelry, and valuable objects. On the surface, this seems ceremonial, but it carries profound significance. It strips the person of status, wealth, and worldly identity. In this sacred space, all are equal. A prince and a pauper stand side by side, measured not by what they own, but by what they seek. Perhaps one of the most potent symbols in the initiation is the journey around the lodge room. In many rituals, the initiate is led in a circle or square around the sacred space. This mirrors ancient solar rites, the movement of celestial bodies, the turning of the year, and the wheel of life itself. It's both a physical journey and a metaphysical one, echoing the pilgrimage of the soul through existence. As the ritual progresses, the blindfold, called a hoodwink, is eventually removed. This moment is electrifying. The candidate is said to have come from darkness to light. It's a visual metaphor for awakening, for the sudden realization that knowledge is illumination. The world looks different now. Nothing has changed externally, but everything has changed within. Jungian psychology is especially useful in interpreting these rites. Carl Jung spoke often about initiation as a universal archetype, one that mirrors the process of individuation, the integration of unconscious elements into the conscious self. Freemasonry, with its structured symbolism and dramatic enactments, acts as a mirror for the psyche. The death of the ego, the trial by fear, the acceptance of inner truths, it's all there, embedded in ritual, echoing in silence. Not many know that some higher degree Masonic rituals explicitly incorporate themes from alchemical texts. In these, the initiate is likened to raw material, unformed lead, who must undergo metaphorical fire, dissolution, separation, and recombination to become gold. This echoes the maxim of alchemy: solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. Initiation, in this sense, is spiritual chemistry. In some traditions, the Masonic initiation also references the building of Solomon's temple, not just as a historical event, but as an internal temple to be constructed stone by symbolic stone. Hiram Abiff, the mythic architect who dies guarding the temple's secrets, represents the part of ourselves willing to die for truth. His tale is reenacted not for drama, but for reflection. What are we willing to sacrifice for principle? What do we guard within ourselves? There are moments in the ritual when the initiate is asked profound questions about their beliefs, their intentions, their moral compass. These aren't tests with right or wrong answers, they're invitations to self-inquiry. And unlike many organizations, Masonry demands reflection in silence. It doesn't preach, it shows. Then it lets you decide what you've seen. Even the act of kneeling in the lodge, placing one's hand on the volume of sacred law, whether the Bible, Quran, or another text, isn't about religious conversion. It's about alignment with something higher. It's a moment of grounding, of recognition that truth has a source beyond the individual, whatever form that may take. And so initiation concludes, but truly it only begins. The initiate walks out of the lodge the same person, yet not the same. Something shifts. It may be subtle, a thought that lingers, a dream that feels more vivid, a sense of order where there was once only noise. Tonight, as the world quiets and you close your eyes, imagine that quiet room once more. The blindfold gently removed, the flickering candles casting long shadows. A man stands reborn, not because he's joined a club, but because he's crossed a threshold inside himself. Freemasonry doesn't demand belief. It asks for understanding, and it offers, in return, a path through symbols and silence, a slow awakening to the sacred architecture within us all. Freemasons and the Founding Fathers. When you look at the layout of Washington, D.C. from above, it doesn't just look like a capital city, it looks like a message, an intentional pattern of streets, circles, and diagonals forming geometric shapes that seem to whisper secrets. But to whom and why? Some believe those answers lie in the rituals and symbols of the Freemasons, carefully woven into the very bones of the American Republic. Let's start with George Washington. He wasn't just the first president, he was also a master Mason. In fact, he laid the cornerstone of the United States Capitol building in a full Masonic ceremony in 1793, wearing traditional regalia, holding a silver trowel, and accompanied by fellow brothers of the craft. This wasn't just symbolic pomp, it was a quiet declaration that this new nation would be built not just on politics, but on principles, on order, balance, and enlightenment. And then there's Benjamin Franklin, printer, inventor, diplomat, and Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge of Pennsylvania. He wasn't a passive member either. He published Masonic texts, designed rituals, and corresponded with lodges in Europe. Franklin believed deeply in Freemasonry's values of liberty, fraternity, and the pursuit of moral perfection. These ideas echoed through the Declaration of Independence, a document he helped craft. But here's what's not often told. Many of the Founding Fathers, John Hancock, Paul Revere, James Monroe, were also Freemasons. Even Marquis de Lafayette, the French general who fought for American independence, was a Mason. They weren't just politicians and generals, they were initiates of a shared symbolic system. They met in lodges, exchanged encrypted letters, and envisioned a world governed not by monarchy but by enlightened individuals. Washington, D.C. was designed by Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, a French-born architect and, surprise, a Freemason. Under his design, the city's layout includes streets aligned with the solstices, geometric proportions matching Pythagorean principles, and structures placed at significant angles. The Capitol, the Washington Monument, the White House, each positioned with a precision that reflects ancient systems of sacred geometry. The dollar bill? Take a closer look. The Great Seal of the United States, printed on the back, is loaded with Masonic symbolism. An unfinished pyramid with 13 steps, one for each original colony, topped by the Eye of Providence. A radiant eye within a triangle, floating above the stone structure representing divine guidance. While not explicitly a Masonic creation, the image mirrors the iconography found in Masonic lodges, and the motto Annuit Coeptis, he has favored our undertakings, resonates with the Masonic idea of a watchful grand architect. The obelisk? That's the Washington Monument. In ancient Egypt, obelisks were solar symbols, rays of the sun frozen in stone. Freemasonry reveres ancient Egyptian symbolism, especially when tied to enlightenment, and the mysteries of life and death. The monument stands as the tallest stone structure in the world and contains a cornerstone that includes Masonic texts, coins, and a copy of the Constitution. But what's truly fascinating is how these symbols were used, not to dominate, but to inspire. The founders didn't hide these ideas to deceive, they encoded them to elevate. They believed that certain truths about justice, self-governance, and liberty were best communicated not through laws alone, but through metaphor, myth, and mystery. Even the very structure of the US government reflects Masonic ideals. The three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, mirror the Masonic emphasis on balance and triads. The idea that men must govern themselves through reason, dialogue, and mutual respect is at the core of both the Constitution and the Lodge. Few know that early American lodges also served as intellectual salons, places where ideas were debated, far from the interference of kings or clergy. They weren't just fraternal hangouts. They were crucibles for political evolution. Discussions about federalism, religious freedom, and civil rights often began in candlelit lodge rooms, long before they reached Congress. Some fringe historians argue that Freemasonry's influence was even deeper, that the revolution itself was a Masonic project. While that may stretch evidence, it's undeniable that many of the values America holds dear, freedom of conscience, separation of church and state, individual dignity, were promoted within the lodge before they appeared in law. And the legacy didn't stop with the founders. Presidents like James Garfield, Theodore Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Gerald Ford were all Masons. Each in their own way carried forward aspects of the craft: integrity, moral fortitude, commitment to service. Truman, in particular, said that his Masonic teachings shaped every decision he made in office. But perhaps the most compelling idea is that the founders saw America itself as a kind of speculative temple, not one built of stone but of people, ideas, and ideals, a nation designed to evolve, to be refined over time, just like the individual Mason working on his inner edifice. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, picture Washington standing under a clear sky, placing the Capitol's cornerstone with that silver trowel. Picture Franklin, pen in hand, drafting lines that would shake empires. These men didn't just build a country, they encoded a vision, and they trusted that, like any good symbol, its meaning would unfold over time. In that sense, America wasn't just founded, it was initiated. Templar blood in Masonic veins. There's a story whispered in old taverns, scrawled in dusty margins of forgotten texts and passed from one quiet lodge to another. It's the story of the Knights Templar, crusading monks turned legendary bankers, guardians of secrets, and, according to legend, the spiritual ancestors of the Freemasons. To the casual observer, this might seem like myth-making, but peel back the layers and you find a trail of curious overlaps, symbolic echoes, and strange survivals that continue to haunt historians and dreamers alike. The Knights Templar were formed in the early 12th century, not long after the First Crusade. Their mission? To protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. But they quickly became more than warriors. They developed an elaborate financial network, some say the first international banking system, and established commanderies from Portugal to the Holy Land. They also built fortresses, preceptories, and chapels, many incorporating architectural elements later seen in Masonic symbolism. The round churches of the Templars, inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, bear geometric similarities to structures that speculative Masons would later regard as sacred space. But power brings danger. By the early 1300s, the Templars had amassed immense wealth and influence. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to them, grew suspicious or perhaps envious. With the cooperation of Pope Clement V, he orchestrated a mass arrest of the Templars on Friday, October 13, 1307. Torture followed. Confessions were extracted. The order was officially dissolved in 1312. Yet the question remains, did they vanish or go underground? Many believe remnants of the Templar order fled across Europe, hiding their rituals, their symbols, and perhaps their secrets within other organizations. Some took refuge in Portugal, rebranding as the Order of Christ. Others may have filtered into Scottish lodges where operative stonemasons were already gathering in guilds. And in these lodges, legend says, the blood of the Templar spirit endured. One of the most persistent connections is the legend of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built by William Sinclair, whose family is closely tied to both Freemasonry and the Templars. Rosslyn is adorned with carvings that defy conventional Christian iconography. Some feature the green man, others depict corn and aloe, plants native to the Americas, supposedly before Columbus. Beneath the chapel lies a crypt sealed for centuries. Some claim it holds Templar relics, others the Holy Grail. The Masonic third-degree ritual, the raising of the Master Mason, has uncanny parallels to Templar martyrdom. The symbolic death of Hiram Abiff, the keeper of the temple's secrets, bears striking similarity to the betrayal and execution of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, who was burned at the stake in 1314. Both die guarding truth. Both are honored through ritual. And in both cases, their silence speaks louder than words. Some Masonic rites even explicitly reference the Templars. The York Rite includes degrees such as Knight of the Red Cross and Knights Templar. Though not all Masons pursue these higher degrees, those who do are often reminded of their chivalric inheritance. These rituals are steeped in Crusader imagery, invoking sacred vows, oaths of secrecy, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. But beyond ritual, symbols offer another bridge. The red cross pate, the double-headed eagle, and even the skull and crossbones, long before they adorned pirate flags, were used by the Templars and reappear in Masonic and Rosicrucian contexts. The Templar seal, showing two knights on a single horse, represented both brotherhood and humility, values also central to Masonic teachings. What's more, both orders share a peculiar reverence for architecture. The Templars built according to mystical proportions, golden ratios, compass alignments, sacred geometry. Freemasons inherited that passion, transferring it from cathedrals to moral frameworks. The temple is no longer physical but spiritual. And then there's the secrecy. The Templars operated in strict silence, their inner rituals known only to senior initiates. So too with the Freemasons. It's this continuity of closed doors, whispered oaths, and encoded knowledge that fuels speculation and admiration. Because secrecy in both cases wasn't about hiding shame, it was about protecting power. Of course, many historians argue that the Masonic-Templar connection is romanticized. There's little direct documentation linking the two, but history doesn't always leave written proof. Sometimes it leaves symbols, sometimes it leaves echoes, and sometimes it leaves people. To this day, many Masonic lodges around the world conduct ceremonies honoring the memory of the Templars. Annual observances mark the execution of de Molay. And countless Freemasons regard the Templar story not as distant legend, but as spiritual lineage. Tonight, as you settle into rest, think of that long line of guardians, first with sword, then with square. Imagine them moving through the centuries, quietly protecting something more valuable than gold, a way of seeing the world, a way of building it, not with bricks or borders, but with virtue, symbols, and brotherhood. And so the story of the Templars may not have ended in fire. It may have continued in handshakes, in ritual chambers, in silence. Not as knights in armor, but as architects of mystery. The lost word and the royal secret. Somewhere in the hushed corners of Masonic ritual lies a pursuit so enigmatic, so haunting, that it has captivated seekers for generations. It is not gold, nor power, nor immortality. It is a word, a lost word, a divine utterance said to carry immense spiritual potency. The Masons call it the lost word. Others have called it the royal secret. Either way, it is not just a sound, but a symbol of ultimate understanding, a cipher for the unity between man and the divine. This idea isn't unique to Freemasonry, but within the lodge it takes on particular gravity. According to Masonic law, the true name of God was once known but lost, buried alongside the ancient builders of Solomon's temple. This name, when spoken, was said to grant the speaker alignment with divine truth, moral clarity, and even creative power, but the word was never recovered, and so Masons search not just for a literal term, but for a symbolic state of consciousness. It sounds like myth, but across time and culture, similar themes echo. In Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, the ineffable name of God, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, is treated with reverence, rarely pronounced, often replaced in speech. In ancient Egyptian texts, knowing the true name of a deity meant power over that deity. In the Vedic traditions of India, sacred sound, Shabda, was believed to contain the essence of all reality. Could the lost word then be a remnant of this ancient linguistic magic? In some Masonic degrees, candidates are told a substitute word in place of the real one. This isn't a deception, it's an invitation. The substitute represents the fallen state of humanity, our distance from divine origin. The true word, they say, will only be revealed when the spiritual temple is rebuilt, not of stone, but within. Linguists and esoteric scholars have long noticed that many sacred languages, Hebrew, Sanskrit, Greek, even Sumerian, associate sound with structure. The ancients believed the spoken word could shape matter, align spirit, and channel intention. In this light, the Masonic quest for the lost word becomes more than historical curiosity. It's a metaphor for rediscovering resonance with truth. There's also the matter of the royal secret. In higher degrees of Masonry, especially within the Scottish Rite, the initiate is told that there exists a core truth, veiled in allegory, to which all rituals point. What that secret is depends on who you ask. Some say it is the unity of all religious truths. Others claim it's the knowledge that man himself is divine. A few even whisper it's the realization that enlightenment comes not from obedience, but from inner awakening. Historically, attempts to locate the lost word have led scholars into odd places. 19th century Masonic researchers, for example, examined Phoenician, Babylonian, and Chaldean incantations for phonetic similarities. Some believed that the ancient name, ineffable name, preserved in Kabbalistic texts, contained hidden syllables encoded in Masonic ritual. A lesser-known thread involves Enochian magic, a system developed by Dr. John Dee, an Elizabethan mystic and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee claimed to have received a divine language, Enochian, through scrying and angelic communication. Though not officially part of Masonry, certain fringe lodges have incorporated Enochian keys into their studies, seeing them as attempts to reconstruct the lost word. Even the famed Rosicrucians, philosophical cousins to the Freemasons, searched for the primal sound, the Logos, which they believed had the power to transform not just the individual, but the entire cosmos. One tale speaks of the language of the birds, an esoteric tongue understood only by sages, in which the secrets of all things could be heard. Within the lodge, the pursuit is deeply personal. The rituals don't tell you what the word is, they challenge you to find it. They use allegory, stories, symbols, tools, not to teach facts, but to prompt awakening. The trowel isn't just a trowel, it's how you bind your actions with purpose. The plumb line reminds you to be upright in all dealings. The lost word is hidden in the silence between symbols. And here's a curious thought. What if the lost word isn't meant to be found in sound, but in silence? In the stillness between rituals, in the quiet realization after a moral act, in the moment of brotherly love? Some Masons believe the word cannot be spoken, it must be lived. Interestingly, in some early Masonic texts, the search for the word is linked to resurrection myths. Just as Osiris was torn apart and scattered, or Christ descended before rising, so too is the word said to be fragmented, awaiting reunion. The royal secret in this interpretation is that wholeness comes through integration of self, of truth, of light and shadow. And maybe that's why this story has endured, because it's not really about a word, it's about the yearning behind it, the idea that something has been lost, not to time, but to forgetfulness, and that we each carry a piece of it inside us, waiting to be spoken, not aloud, but through how we build, how we live, and how we serve. Tonight, as your thoughts settle and your breath slows, let yourself wonder. If there is a word that unlocks truth, what would it sound like? Maybe it wouldn't sound like anything at all. Maybe it would feel like recognition, like home, like a forgotten truth, returning not from outside, but from within. And perhaps in that quiet knowing, you've already found it. Inside the 33rd degree, fact or fabrication. Somewhere above the quiet solemnity of the Masonic lodge, whispered in the corners of conspiracy, lies the number 33. The 33rd degree, spoken of with reverence by some and suspicion by others, is often viewed as the pinnacle of Masonic mystery. But what really happens behind that symbolic curtain? Is it fact, fiction, or something in between? Let's begin with what's known. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, one of the most widespread Masonic systems, includes a progression of degrees from the 4th to the 32nd. These are philosophical lessons, not ranks of power, each building upon moral allegories and esoteric concepts. But then there's the 33rd. It's called an honorary degree, bestowed not through ritual advancement, but as a recognition of exceptional service to the craft or humanity. Officially, it is conferred by the Supreme Council and cannot be petitioned for. The candidate must be invited. This alone adds to the mystique. A level you can't apply for? It begins to sound less like ceremony and more like initiation into something hidden. But what makes it so fascinating is the folklore surrounding it. Some claim that within the 33rd degree lie secret truths, cosmic laws, ancient symbols, and revelations about mankind's destiny. Others believe it's simply ceremonial, more formality than revelation. The truth, as always, may be a blend. There are real historical layers to this degree that are seldom discussed. The number 33 itself carries weight across traditions. In Kabbalah, 33 is linked to the Sephirot, the paths of divine emanation. Jesus was crucified at age 33, adding to its mystical symbolism in Christian mysticism. In numerology, 33 is a master number representing compassion, spiritual awakening, and transformation. In the ancient Indian science of Kundalini Yoga, it's said the human spine has 33 vertebrae through which the sacred energy rises. Within Masonic tradition, the 33rd degree often involves the symbol of the phoenix, a mythical bird that dies in fire and is reborn from its ashes. The initiate is asked to contemplate not just mortality, but transmutation. What are you willing to let burn in yourself in order to rise anew? The ritual language of the 33rd is not publicly known, but certain consistent elements are rumored: solemn vows, ancient oaths, and symbolic gestures that echo both Templar and Hermetic motifs. Some researchers have found parallels between the 33rd degree and the sublime degree in the Egyptian rite of Mizraim, an arcane system tied to the rituals of Cagliostro and the Rosicrucians. Still, the secrecy breeds speculation. Some claim the 33rd degree opens access to political or financial influence. Others argue that it's merely a ceremonial title awarded to dedicated members. Then there are the more esoteric theories, suggesting the degree contains lost Atlantean knowledge, extraterrestrial contact codes, or access to ancient energy grids. One of the lesser-known facts involves Albert Pike, a towering figure in American Freemasonry who held the 33rd degree and served as Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite in the 19th century. Pike authored Morals and Dogma, a vast tome exploring the philosophical underpinnings of Masonic degrees. Within it, he suggested that symbols conceal truths not meant for all, and that each Mason must decode the ritual for himself. In one controversial passage, Pike hints that higher initiates may interpret God not as a personal deity, but as the supreme architect behind all natural laws, aligning closely with Hermetic, Gnostic, and even theosophical beliefs. Critics seized on such writings to claim that the 33rd degree reveals a hidden theology. Supporters argue it simply deepens the spiritual metaphor. Then there's the tale of Manly P. Hall, the mystic and philosopher who explored the deeper side of Masonry in works like The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Though he was not made a Mason until late in life, he too received the 33rd degree, an honor recognizing his contribution to esoteric philosophy. Hall viewed the craft as a repository of timeless wisdom, preserving truths about consciousness, the cosmos, and the alchemical nature of man. But here's a quiet truth often overlooked. The 33rd degree is not about elitism, it's about service. Many who receive it are educators, philosophers, philanthropists, those who have devoted themselves to making the world a better place. It's a call to responsibility, not reward. The true honor lies not in being elevated, but in being entrusted with something sacred. And yet, that aura of mystery lingers. Because the degree is so rarely discussed in public, it becomes a canvas onto which outsiders project their suspicions. Shadow governments, secret cabals, new world orders. These stories emerge not from what Masons say, but from what they don't. So is the 33rd degree fact or fabrication? Maybe it's both, maybe it's a mirror. To some, it reflects ambition, to others, aspiration, and to a few, it represents a lifelong quest, not for power, but for wisdom, a confirmation that the path they walk is not just ritual, but revelation. Tonight, as you drift toward rest, imagine not a throne, but a candle, a small, steady flame passed quietly from one hand to another. That's the 33rd degree, not a secret society ruling the world, but a quiet acknowledgement among seekers. That service is sacred, that wisdom is earned, and that truth, like fire, is something we carry, not for ourselves, but to light the way for others. Masonry and global power theories. As shadows stretch across history, one story always seems to re-emerge, whispered in corridors, written between the lines, and woven into the pages of forbidden books. It is the belief that Freemasonry, far from being a fraternity of symbolism and service, is a hidden hand in global affairs. That behind revolutions and treaties, stock markets and empires, sits the compass and the square. These aren't new suspicions, they go back centuries. But in the modern age of media, misinformation and mystery, the narrative has grown louder. Some say Freemasons orchestrated the French Revolution. Others believe they helped shape the United Nations. More extreme theories link them to secret banks, black budgets, and underground cities beneath capitals. But where does fantasy end and fact begin? Let's start with something grounded. Many influential figures in history have indeed been Freemasons. Not just Washington and Franklin, but also Mozart, Winston Churchill, Simon Bolivar, Theodore Roosevelt, and countless judges, scientists, and writers across the centuries. With so many high-profile initiates, it's easy to see why the public imagines an invisible network pulling strings. One of the most persistent claims is that Masonry helped engineer global revolutions. In 18th century France, many Enlightenment thinkers were known to meet in lodges. Voltaire was initiated shortly before his death. Lafayette, a hero in both the American and French revolutions, was a proud Freemason. And in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, leader of the world's only successful slave revolt, was said to draw moral courage from Masonic ideals of liberty and fraternity. But is that control or inspiration? Masonic lodges, especially in the Enlightenment era, were often among the few places where free thought, religious tolerance, and democratic ideals could be debated without royal or ecclesiastical interference. Were they fomenting insurrection or simply creating safe spaces for new ideas? The same ambiguity clouds their alleged ties to global finance. Some theorists point to the Rothschilds, others to central banks, claiming a Masonic grip on world economics. But there's little evidence of any formal Masonic directive guiding economic policy. Freemasonry has no pope, no central authority. It's decentralized, more like a constellation than a chain of command. That hasn't stopped speculation. The Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and Davos are all said to echo Masonic structure, but that's often based on superficial resemblance, closed-door meetings, symbolic logos, powerful attendees, not hard connections. And when secrets abound, symbols fill the silence. What's less known and more nuanced is how Masonic ideals have subtly shaped diplomacy. After World War I, many Masonic lodges in Europe promoted the idea of a League of Nations. They envisioned a world where sovereign states could settle differences through reason, not war. This was not covert control, but a reflection of Masonic principles: harmony, brotherhood, and peace through understanding. In Latin America too, Masonic influence was felt. José de San Martín in Argentina and Benito Juárez in Mexico were Freemasons who guided their countries towards sovereignty. Their writings reflect Masonic language of light and liberty, of building just societies, again not proof of conspiracy but of shared moral architecture. More obscure is the role Freemasonry played in colonial resistance across Africa and Asia. In British-ruled India, several Indian nationalists joined Masonic lodges, seeing them as one of the few arenas where colonizer and colonized could meet as equals. They used Masonic principles to advocate reform, education, and social upliftment. Lodges became crucibles of cultural awakening, not commands for conquest. Still, ambiguity fuels suspicion. Freemasons take oaths of secrecy. They use symbols. Their rituals are closed to outsiders. In a world where transparency is prized, mystery feels threatening. This makes Masonry an easy canvas for projection. Pop culture doesn't help. Films like National Treasure and The Da Vinci Code blend fact with fiction, casting Freemasons as keepers of world-changing secrets. Conspiracy forums spin tales of 33 families, secret satellites, and arcane rituals at midnight in alpine lodges. Yet for most Masons, the only midnight ritual involves washing dishes after a charity dinner. What might surprise you is that many Masons themselves view these conspiracy theories with bemusement. They see them not as attacks, but as mirrors. Symbols only have power when misunderstood. And in misunderstanding, people often reveal their own fears about control, chaos, and unseen forces. Carl Jung might suggest these theories are projections of the collective unconscious, a need to map meaning onto a complex, unstable world. The idea of a secret society in control gives people comfort. It means someone is driving the ship, even if the destination is unclear. It's the fear of randomness that fuels the myth of the master planner. But perhaps there's another truth beneath the surface. Maybe it's not that Freemasonry controls the world, but that its values echo within those who do. Men and women in power who were once raised in lodges carry lessons of integrity, restraint, and service. Maybe Masonry doesn't command them, maybe it inspires them. Tonight, as you drift into rest, let your mind wander through marble halls and candlelit chambers. See the figures gathered, not to rule, but to reflect, not to plot, but to preserve. And maybe, just maybe, in a world spinning ever faster, the true conspiracy isn't power, it's principle. A quiet brotherhood reminding us that wisdom hides in symbols and that the most enduring influence comes not from control but from example. A world built on silence. If you listen closely, not with ears, but with a kind of inner quiet, you'll hear it. The gentle hum beneath history. The silence that shaped empires. It is not the silence of absence, but the silence of choice. Freemasonry, more than a society of handshakes and symbols, may very well be the quietest force history has ever known. Unlike institutions that shout their power, Freemasonry whispers. It does not command armies or control parliaments. Its rituals aren't broadcast, its leaders rarely known, and yet its fingerprints appear on documents of revolution, beneath the domes of cathedrals and carved into the very streets of capital cities. But never with fanfare, always with silence. Consider how Masonry spreads not through marketing, recruitment, or public declarations. It grows by resonance. One soul recognizes a certain hunger in another, a thirst for meaning, for virtue, for truth, veiled in metaphor. And so the journey begins. A whispered invitation, a candlelit room, a lesson passed not by lecture, but by symbol. This preference for silence is deliberate. The initiate learns early, words can lie, but symbols rarely do. A square doesn't bend to ideology, a compass doesn't flatter ego. In this, Freemasonry teaches restraint. It does not preach from pulpits or shout from rooftops. It invites reflection. The ancient mystery schools of Egypt, Eleusis and Delphi, all prized silence. Not out of secrecy, but out of reverence. The unsaid was sacred. Freemasonry inherits this. It understands that truth shouted is often rejected, but truth discovered quietly, internally, changes lives. In this age of noise, of algorithms, of shouting matches, of constant distraction, silence becomes radical. Think of how few spaces today ask us to be still, to contemplate, to sit in mystery rather than demand an answer. The Masonic Lodge offers that space, a chamber not of answers, but of questions. Some lesser-known rites emphasize this even more. In the French rite, the initiate is sometimes left alone in a chamber of reflection, a dim room with only a skull, a candle, and a mirror. Here, before entering the lodge, he must write his philosophical testament. Why is he seeking light? What does he fear? What will he leave behind? It is a quiet confrontation, no audience, no applause, just one soul meeting itself. In many Masonic traditions, a vow of silence accompanies certain degrees, not to hide knowledge, but to cultivate discipline. The mouth, after all, is quicker than the mind. But silence teaches discernment. It teaches how to listen to others, yes, but also to the faint voice within. Even the Masonic tools carry this philosophy. The trowel smooths rough edges, not with force, but with calm persistence. The plumb line measures uprightness, not for judgment, but for integrity. The trestle board, like the blank page, waits silently for the architect's vision. Each teaches through doing, not saying. Historically, some of the most transformative Masons were not those who gave speeches, but those who acted quietly. Take Prince Hall, the African-American abolitionist and Mason who founded a lodge for black men in the 18th century, against all odds in a time when such a move could provoke violence. He didn't campaign with noise. He built a space of dignity and respect in silence, creating ripples that still touch lives today. And consider how many world events were influenced not through proclamation, but persuasion. Masonic ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, appeared not with marching bands, but as footnotes in founding documents, as motifs in paintings, as alignments in urban design. They whispered their way into the world. What's perhaps most curious is how this quiet power unsettles people. In a world conditioned to equate power with volume, Masonry's refusal to speak plainly invites suspicion. Why so quiet? What are they hiding? But maybe the better question is, what do we miss in our own noise? The ancients said the gods spoke in silence. That wisdom came not in answers, but in dreams, symbols, synchronicities. The Masonic worldview echoes this. It doesn't claim to hold the truth. It claims only to preserve the path, and it trusts the seeker to walk it with integrity. In an old Templar tradition, there's a phrase, non nobis, domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name be the glory. The work, they believed, wasn't to elevate the self, but to serve something greater. Masons, inheritors of that code, still walk that quiet path, not to be seen, but to build. So tonight, as your room dims and your mind begins to settle, consider this. In a world built on noise, perhaps silence is the last sacred space. Perhaps the real architects aren't the ones giving speeches, but the ones laying unseen foundations, the ones smoothing the mortar of civilization by hand, unseen, unsung. Because when all the noise fades, what remains? A compass, a square, and a silence that speaks louder than words.